What are the Hunger Games for?
Hanging
So, The Hunger Games: The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is a recently developed movie from Lionsgate. Of course, they adapted the first 3 books of the Hunger Games franchise into 4 movies. They split Mockingjay into 2 parts, and that concluded everything in 2015. Hugely successful movies, made Jennifer Lawrence a megastar. They were very
Mhm,
popular, especially during that time, adapting popular book series into franchises. That was
mhm,
definitely a huge wave and a huge trend. And so recently, Suzanne Collins, I believe, the author of the franchise, wrote a new book, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which came out a few years ago. And shortly thereafter, Lionsgate decided to work directly with her to adapt this new story, which is actually a prequel to the main Hunger Games film series and franchise. It takes place 64 years before the events of the first movie, and essentially we're following a young President Snow before he becomes President Snow. We're following him as a young man and his sort of encounters and his experiences with the Hunger Games and how he came to be the person that we saw him become in those first movies. And so we wanted to go check this out this past weekend. It's definitely one of the I think more anticipated movies of the fall, and so we got a chance to take a look
mhm.
at it this past weekend. So with all of that out the way, man, I will pass it over to you. What did you think about the Hunger Games: The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes?
So, Hunger Games has always been something I liked, but never really came, I think, to love. I always appreciated the first 2 films. But man, those Mockingjays, I don't know what happened to those movies. They just kinda fall off the rails a little bit, which is interesting because you would think a story like Mockingjay that they literally took the time to have 2 movies for, you would think it would turn out better, I think, than what they turned out to be, and it's so interesting because after watching this movie, I almost feel like this should have been 2 parts in instead of something like Mockingjay, and I say that because there is a 3rd act to this film that it's fine, like, it feels like it belongs there, but it also feels like, dang, this movie is long. I wish they just put this in another part of the movie because it's I don't know. It feels like such a long part of the film for me. But what I will say, this film has some things going for it. It's one, I actually like the premise. I like being able to say, oh, this is a prequel based off the book. We know exactly who Snow is. Let's go into this movie and figure out what's going on. I love the premise of the film. I think the acting was very superb. I think all parties involved when it came to just the cast was tremendous. Shout out to Tom Blythe who had to carry this film or was the main character in the film. I think he did a tremendous job buying us into all of the emotional stakes that he had on the screen. Shout out to Rachel Zegler too. It's funny because I feel like they always she got to sing. Like if she in the movie, they're gonna make her sing, and so they definitely take her and make her sing in this film. But she does a good job as well, man. Viola Davis, hey, she did what she needed to do. The makeup in this movie, I think, is tremendous. I really love the way it looks. I love the costumes. I think both of those if they were to like pop up in an Oscar conversation, I would not be surprised. To be honest, they did a really good job, I think, on costumes and hair and makeup in this film, and a lot of good production design in this film too. This Hunger Games always had a lot of action in it, and in fact, that's one of the things I've always liked out of most Hunger Games films is production design and the way a lot of the movies look. And this movie is no exception. They do a good job of like putting us into a new space and a new arena that looks not only different but telling of the times of the Hunger Games. But you need to realize like this is like going this timeline is like the 10th Hunger Games and it needed to look like that, and I think they did a good job of taking us back in time to that period of time as well, man. And I think I think the first 2 acts in this movie are pretty good. I really had no, not too many qualms. Just the story is just fine. When you know what's going to happen, it's like can't be too surprised. But I think for a movie like this that did come out a prequel to a big franchise a while down the line, I think they did a pretty good job, man. And other than that, there's just like some couple questionable CGI things in there, and again, not a lot, but a couple questionable CGI things in there. But I think the humor's there, the action's there, and they did a good job. So not to me, it's not a perfect movie, but I definitely enjoyed myself in the theater. It's just a little too long for me.
To your point about the length and the two-parter sort of conversation, that was actually something that they considered. They talked about potentially splitting this into two parts, but the filmmakers decided not to do that because they regretted doing that for Mockingjay
Hmm.
because of how it turned out. And I think the poor reception, because a lot of the times with two-parters, and we still experience it to this day, these movies are unnecessarily split into two parts for no reason. It's
Hmm.
really a cash grab at the end of the day. And that trend was particularly hot at that at that moment in time when you had Harry Potter doing it and Twilight doing it, and it was
Yeah, it
like,
was a lot.
okay, y'all are double dipping at this point and really
Mhm.
cashing in on the fandom, and rarely did it turn out to be an actual creatively good decision. It turned out to just
Hmm.
be like, oh well, I don't know if we needed two parts. Maybe we should have just made one part better. So I'm fine with the one movie because I really I can't stand any more of these franchises trying to call their shots and dedicate themselves to multi-movie deals. We saw that recently with the
That's true.
Fantastic Beast franchise. That just annoys the shit out of me to say like, oh yeah, we're gonna make 5 movies. Well, how? Like, I don't even know if the first movie's good. And I don't like any
Right.
of those movies, to be honest. And so when they do stuff like that, that just really annoys me. And I think it causes somewhat of a fan backlash. And I'm glad that they make the choice to just like dedicate themselves to one movie, even though it had to be
Hmm.
longer for sure. I'm glad that they just stuck to one movie. Now, conversely, on the other side of that, the final act does still feel rushed. Like they definitely
Yeah.
do not do the best job at concluding the story. And some of the, I think some of the narrative threads that are introduced in that third act just aren't dealt with in the most satisfying way, especially based off of how the previous two acts went, because a lot of it is about the relationship between Tom Blythe as a young Snow and Rachel Zegler's character, and really just seeing how their romance evolves and develops, and just that back and forth of her character, I think trying to make sure that this guy remains a good person, make sure that he retains the heart and the empathy that he has while he's exposed to this really brutal practice that they have in this fictional universe. And we just kind of
Hmm.
see that slowly wither away from him, that innocence and that empathy, all of those things just start to slowly wither away. But that transition and that flip of his character just kind of comes a little bit out of nowhere. I think that they
Hmm.
try to do a couple of things to really build him up and make you, I think, make you sort of connect with him in a way that you can see like why he becomes a little bit more brutal and ruthless in his practices, and why he was able to assume these titles and this place within Pan Am and really ascend the ranks. But when we get to that third act, which takes place right after like the Hunger Games in the middle of it, it's just like, oh well, we're kind of here quickly, and we don't really, I think, get a great
Hmm.
sense of like why he's all of a sudden somebody that we should detest as opposed to root for. But on the flip side of that, I actually did really like this movie. For the most part, there were a lot of things in it that I enjoyed, and this is easily the best time that I've had at a Hunger Games movie since Catching Fire. I thought Catching Fire
Hmm.
was really good. The first one is pretty good, but this one was like the most satisfying for me, just because it does do something different. You do get to see this universe in a different type of state than what we saw it in that original series, and it's a different type of energy because we are following not Katniss, we're following a completely different character who goes down a darker path, and so it has a new type of aura to it. And really, the supporting cast here overall is pretty fine. You do have a Viola Davis who brings that pedigree. Rachel Zegler is just a young superstar in the making, just supremely talented, has the voice of a fucking angel. Like, oh my goodness, it's ridiculous, like
Hmm.
how great she is. And Jason Schwartzman, who has
Oh
some
my
of the
God.
best comedy in this movie. I haven't laughed this much probably in any Hunger Games movie, just because of his one-liners. Whoever wrote that stuff, and his delivery was just always on point. Like everything he said was pretty much funny to me. There wasn't any
Yeah.
line that he delivered that was a miss. I'm like, yeah, you're batting for 100, here or whatever. Like the actual, I don't know. I'm not good at baseball, but anyway, it was great to see him perform and do that comedy to the level that we know that he can achieve. And so there's a lot to like about it. And I think you come to a Hunger Games movie to kind of experience like that brutality and what that's going to look like from an action standpoint and a set piece
Hmm.
standpoint. And they don't pull any punches. They really go hard here, and they lean into the brutal nature of what these games represent and why it's a terrible practice, why it's a bad thing. I don't think that there's ever a glorification of this practice. You can absolutely see like this is shitty. Like we shouldn't be doing this as humans. And the Hunger Games is all that's all pulling a lot of narrative tissue from Battle Royale, which also has a lot of those similar themes where you see just a society do something pretty much because it's bored. And I think here, because this is like an earlier iteration of the games, you get to see just those rough around the edges aspects of the games themselves. They're not as
Yeah.
fully formed and developed as they are when we see them in the original
Mhm.
series, right? By the time they do it, it's like the 75th one. It's perfected. It's down to a science. Here it's very much still rushed and rough around the edges. And there's a line even that Jason Schwartzman says in the movie. He's like, "Oh, we'll do that next year. We didn't get that right this year, but we'll do that next year." So I like that they called out attention to that. And so overall, pretty good experience. Definitely surpassed my expectations. I don't know how it's going to do with the fan base. It didn't perform that well at the box office, which is just kind of the consistent
It's the
story of many of
narrative.
these franchises these
Yeah.
days. People are not gravitating towards them as much as they used to. Now, this was conceived as a single standalone entry, I think
Mhm.
largely because it is based off of one book, but I don't know. Do you think that there's enough there to maybe continue to keep going with the Hunger Games, sort of sequel to this, maybe another iteration of this story? Again, Suzanne Collins has not wrote anything additional. I don't know if she has plans to, but we know a lot of these
Mhm.
studios, they'll greenlight stuff anyway, even if there is not source material. We saw it with Game of
Yeah.
Thrones, we're seeing it with other franchises, Lord of the Rings. Like, they'll take it and run with it if they see that there's money on the table, just based off of how it's performing right now, the soft, sort of box office performance, and the fact that there technically is no more story to tell, at least as of now. Do you foresee that this is going to be a franchise that continues in the cinematic realm in the near future?
Man, because it didn't do that well at the box office, maybe not, like I don't know, maybe this is legit the end. But I could, if she was to write more, I could see a world where there was another movie or there was another, even a limited series TV show, a Hunger Games TV show. I wouldn't be surprised if something like that was to pop up. But man, I really don't know, because I can't even, can the studio even justify it if this movie didn't make any money? You know what I mean? So I really don't know where that lands. But maybe they don't for now. Maybe that's just something they have in their back pocket until something feels more green lighty. But even in my mind, from business standpoint, I can't even say, yeah, go make that thing, even though there's no book, because they didn't go see this. So it's kind of hard to tell. But for now, I'm gonna say nah, they leave it alone.
Yeah, the one thing that they do have working for them is that they made this movie for $100 million. And so it's not that overinflated budget that we've seen with other franchises. It's not two
Right.
plus 250. So what they have to make is, I think, significantly less than what some other franchises have to make. So they could do okay. They still have a potential in a realm of possibility where this movie can do okay and maybe break even. I think
Hmm.
what happens is if Suzanne Collins decides to not write anything else, if she has no more stories to tell, then inevitably somebody's going to get the rights to the original story, reboot that, and just do that over again. I think that that's the likely outcome, because we
Hmm.
see that with Harry Potter. There are no more books like that. That is done. So what have they done? Oh, we're just going to tell the same story over again. We'll just make it into a
Yo.
TV series. I think that's inevitable for the Hunger Games. It is such a big franchise, and so maybe if you just give it enough time, enough of a break in between, and go back to that original beloved story, then they'll find the justification there. Whether it's another film series or a TV show, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But if she decides to not, pick up the pen and do anything else, and maybe she already is, I don't know. I'm not, really tapped in that like that. But if she decides not to, then inevitably somebody's going to get these rights and say, like, let's just do it again and just find a different cast and do it in a bit of a different way. That's just like that's the
Hmm.
outcome with all of this stuff eventually at the end of the day.
Boo.
So we'll have to see. But folks, those are all of our thoughts on the Hunger Games, the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. If you've checked out this movie, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.